We're going to take Commander Keen, released in 1990, and transform it into a VR game. Step 1 is to play the game online for about 4 hours and then think, right, how am I going to do this? I figured the best place to start is by completing all the modelling. Now unfortunately no one on the Unity asset store had released an asset with the nice folks at commanderkeen.com had already collated all the maps from the game, so I was able to study those and start to collate a list of everything that needed to be created. We've got blocks, platforms, point items, collectible items, ship items, keys, doors, decorative signs, snowmen, snow yachts, and of course the bottom of the started out great, open Blender, default cube, block 1 done. There's nothing too difficult with the modelling here, lots of creating cylinders, cubes, extruding, creating materials, signing those materials. Let's take a little time here to look at modelling the Vorticon. For each of the enemies the workflow was pretty much the same. You start with reference images. For this there wasn't too much out there was quite a bit of fan art, but really only original sprites for proper reference. You can start by boxing out the basic shape and proportions of the Vorticon, and then jumping into sculpting mode. You just start to grab, smooth out, use clay strips, pull out some teeth, etc. until you get a shape that you like. When we look at the poly count, we can quickly realise we just can't bring this into Unity how it is, so retopology time. Taking your high poly model, we start with a plane, add some modifiers and start moving that plane around the model. Once we've finished, we'll be left with a nice low poly model that still has the shape of that high poly model. Next we want to look at unwrapping that low poly model so that we can bake all that lovely sculpted detail onto a normal map, which will then show up in Unity. Clearly he's not moving too much right now, so next we're going to rig him, we're going to animating, and obviously you need to make him dance. With all the modelling completed, we can export them into Unity, set up all the materials and start building the game. I like to start by creating a test area. This allows me to set up every asset and material and turn them all into prefabs, ready to be used throughout the game. The start was getting the scale correct. For a VR game, scale is obviously important, and I wanted to make sure that when playing the game, it felt like the same scale as the original and that you were playing from the perspective of an 8-year-old boy. Looking up the average height of 8-year-olds gave me the set camera height. Using that information, I was able to tell from the screenshot that each block was roughly 1 meter. The blocks were pretty simple, they just needed box gliders. For the enemies, I created animation controllers with various states of animation. The AI was pretty basic for this game, some simple pathfinding, chase mechanics were programmed in. Using Unity's navmech system made moving them around pretty easy. For collecting items, it was some simple gliders and scripts for adding them to the inventory, increasing the shots and the lasers, increasing the score. The first death animation was, shall we say, a little bit boring. Adding in some ragdoll physics made this much more fun. But maybe I need to dial back that force just a little bit. I should probably turn this bit into a shootout mode because it's not actually in the final game, but would be a lot of fun to play. With all the assets ready to go and the player controllers sorted, it's time to build the levels. Luckily for us, they've already been designed in the 90s, so we can just bring in our level image for reference and start to drag and drop our prefabs into place. Using snap to grid was great here, as I could copy and paste the prefabs and drag each block into position. Once all the blocks have been placed, it's time to place all the collectible items like the book, lolly, pizza, Coke cans, along with any playable collectible items like the gun or ship parts. After that, we bring in the enemies. I've created a simple target finder, allowing me to place empty game objects, and while the enemy isn't in range of the player, they will randomly walk between each of these targets. In the original game, there isn't any light source in the level, but that led to quite a dark play area. I brought in some ceiling lights and wall lights and placed them throughout the map. Once all that was in place, there were far too many lights to process in real time, so with all the lights set to baked, I can bake the lighting and the level looks great. With that done, we are now ready to play through the first level in VR. It's key to understand here that the workflow I've shown is very precise. In reality, it's usually more of an iterative approach. If it wasn't a rebuild of an original game, I would have likely built a proof of concept level before spending all that time on the modelling. I had to do quite a lot of testing in the test area to make sure that things worked as expected prior to building levels, and there was actually a lot of bug finding and bug fixing first. Playing through the game, it works great. It really feels like a platformer game, but in virtual reality. and if you are familiar with the game, this level will be totally familiar to you. One thing I noticed that doesn't work as well, on a 2D screen you get to see quite a lot of the map above and behind the player, which makes it really easy to see where you should go. From a first person perspective, this is not quite as clear. To combat that, I'm going to build something onto Commander Keen's wrist. In one of the later Commander Keen games we get introduced to his wrist computer. I thought using this would be a great way of showing a 2D version of a level and any other information that is usually hidden away in menus, such as the number of lives you have or any keycards you've collected that level. With some quick modelling, we have a wrist computer. With that computer attached to the left hand, I create a material that is linked to a texture. That texture is a render texture received from a camera located outside of the play area. The camera has a simple script attached to follow the player as he moves, meaning we see a real-time representation of where Keen is at any point during the gameplay. Now, if you get lost during the gameplay, you can look down at your wrist and work out where to go next. With that done, I'm happy with the gameplay now, so on to the level building. 16 different levels were needed to be built, so for the next few days, copy, paste, bake was my life. With all the levels built, we need to link them together. This is done by a map area where you walk between each level and enter caves and cities looking for the 4 ship parts. To do this, I took the original map into Blender, extruded the walls upwards to create them. Bringing that into Unity and adding a rock texture, I added each entrance and created a script to recognise the player and start the level when the player enters. Finally, I needed to create a main area for the player to start the game and receive the story, but something was missing.
Commander Keen in Invasion of the Vorticons. Billy Blaze, 8-year-old genius, working diligently in his backyard clubhouse, has created an Episode 1, Marooned on Mars.
With that done, I can call this project completed. I'm happy with the outcome. I think it remains true to the original and really works as a first-person VR platformer. Let me know what you think in the comments.